good morning, or depending on when you're listening to this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and I was always told I had a voice for radio, so I've made a podcast all about the Pokémon trading card game, and you're listening to PTCG Radio. Now, my apologies, I was off last week. There was no podcast last week. I hope you coped. I like to think that you did, but I'm back, and I don't know when the next time I'm not going to do a podcast is, quite frankly, ladies and gentlemen. This ship is going to keep on sailing. A happy new year to you all, of course. I hope you had a wonderful new year. It's always a disappointing... New Year's Eve is never actually fun. I mean, if you've ever had an actual fun New Year's Eve, feel free to tweet me at the Wassy or email me at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk, but they don't exist. It's always good in theory, never good in practice. But we have a year's worth of podcasts. I don't see any reason I won't still be doing this at the end of 2016. So let's start off with a brand new year with another podcast. Although with it having been Christmas, ladies and gentlemen, we don't have a huge amount of news, so to speak. There's a couple little bits that we will go through, but there's honestly not a huge amount. We're going to give an updated look at City Championships, and we're going to talk about one deck that might be making a slight comeback, if it was ever big in the first place, and a new deck that might be making an appearance, but probably won't, because although it seems like fun, it's actually kinda rubbish. And believe me, I wish that wasn't the case. So, starting off with some news, actually, just a quick update on the YouTube channel, youtube.com/PTCGRadio. I had that little vanity URL because I hit 1,000 subscribers. That's a lower limit where they let you have that vanity URL. I am going to hit 2,000 hopefully very soon as I sit and record this. I think I'm sitting at 1971. I need 29 new subscribers on my YouTube channel to hit what I consider to be the next milestone. So, if you know anyone that isn't subscribed to PTCG Radio on YouTube, or if heaven forbid you yourself are not subscribed to PTCG Radio on YouTube, get yourself over there. And as it's a new year, I should remind you that a complete archive of all the podcasts can be found at ptcgradio.wordpress.com, and that if you haven't subscribed on iTunes, you probably should have by now. Maybe as a New Year's resolution, I'll figure out what Stitcher is and try and get this bad boy up onto Stitcher. So starting off then with the news for this week, the free pack blister promos have been revealed for Breakpoint, which will be our new set, and they're not massively exciting, I'm afraid. We have a Galaxy Holo reprint of the Pyroar with the Pokemon Catcher-like ability. The Galaxy Holo basically means like the little spotty planet-like holo, rather than the holo we see on the regular cards. It's the one where if you discard a fire energy attached to the Pyroar, you get to essentially have a Lysandra for free. I say for free, you have to discard a fire energy attached to Pyroar in order to do it. And this is a reprint of the Pyroar from Phantom Forces. There's also an Umbreon, which is being released for the first time in this set. It's not a particularly good Umbreon, but oh my goodness, it's beautiful. In Japan, it was given to the winners of the Umbreon Night Battle Gym Challenge tournaments, which is not the snappiest name for tournaments, and there was an all-night party promo, which is not being released in these blisters. Don't know when we're going to get that. The Umbreon itself does 30 damage for a dark and a colourless, not affected by resistance, or for a dark and a double colourless, 60 damage. Turn one of your face-down prize cards face up. If that prize card is a Pokemon, you do 120 damage, and the prize card remains face up for the rest of the game. Now, I've talked about this with Town Map in the past. This is a bit of a double-edged sword. On the one hand, you get extra information. On the other hand, your opponent does. I've told the story on the podcast a couple of times now that Nationals a couple of years ago, I think it was the last year I actually played before I started commentating Nationals, I was playing Virizion Genesect against my friend Dan, the Diamond Minecart, that famous YouTube chappie. He was playing an Aromatisse style deck. I used Town Map. I showed him that my G-Booster was prized. I showed him that I couldn't one-hit KO anything he had, so he piled all his energy on a Mewtwo and swept. It turned what should have been a 1 series into a tied 1-1 series. But these things happen. 120 for free energy isn't even that good. I'm not a huge fan, and it's a stage 1. And to be honest, ladies and gentlemen, in Expanded, Dark is going to be an exceptional deck type. It already is pretty gosh darn good, and that's without the new Darkrai coming along, which is spectacular. We talked about him recently. In Standard, Evil Tau sees quite a lot of play, but it's seeing play with things like Zoroark or Gallade, and I don't see why you would cut a Zoroark for an Umbreon. It's just not as good. We've seen some early releases of the Aerodactyl and Aurorus boxes. They're not particularly good. We've talked about them before. I'm not terribly excited, to be honest. But the interesting thing is that the Aerodactyl does have a Spirit Link in the set. I've talked on a number of occasions on this podcast that Pokemon have made it quite clear that if you are getting the Mega in a proper set, you get a Spirit Link in the set. If you're getting it as a promo, you're not getting a Spirit Link. Well, they appear to have changed their mind. Big downside, they're not releasing retrospective Spirit Links. I, for one, and I know we've got a lot of Dark Pokemon like I just talked about, I, for one, would be a huge fan of having an Absol Spirit Link. I think Absol, the Mega, could be really good if it had a Spirit Link, but it doesn't, so it's a moot point. It's not good enough to occasionally end your turn when you want to evolve. Oh, the side note, by the way, I started talking about YouTube. I forgot to say, I've literally, as we speak, uploading the final from Huddersfield Regional, which is Vespiquen against Sceptile in a very good game. And in fact, as soon as you finish listening to this podcast, might I suggest you go to youtube.com/PTCGRadio and check that bad boy out. There's also a whole bunch of games up there I've recorded recently, including at a recent expanded league challenge. I've got an expanded Cities Championship on Saturday in Truro that I'm hoping to go to. Then a standard format league challenge in Norwich and City Championship in Chesterfield next weekend. And I'm hoping to be able to record games at all of them. One of the things I want to do this year for the YouTube channel is very much continue in the same vein as we ended last year. There's going to be the odd deck profile, reaction to news, etc., etc. And obviously top 10s of each set. I need to do the breakthrough one. That's coming quite soon. But it's going to be predominantly commentated games. It's what a lot of other channels aren't doing, or they're just doing PTCGO games, which in my mind I'm afraid they aren't as good, purely because you don't get the people turning up with these decks that they've been practicing and working on. They're testing, they're trying silly decks. I don't find the PTCGO games as entertaining. And people are often playing while they're watching telly rather than actually giving it their all. There aren't that many channels, in fact any channels I know of, that are uploading, really regular or at least often videos with full commentary, and that's what I'm going to be aiming to provide this year, so get over and check them out. The other set that's launched quite early is the Break Evolution box, which has got the Behemoth Break, Noctowl Break, and Empoleon Break. I've made no secret of the fact that I'm quite a fan of Noctowl Break. Whether it will actually be any good in the long run, I'm not sure. I'm a huge fan of Noctowl, and Noctowl Break has a fun little attack as well. I don't think it's amazing, but I think he's kind of cool. 60 damage for free energy, plus 30 for each trainer card in your opponent's hand could be pretty good pretty quickly. I might mention Noctowl when I talk about one of those decks later on. Now, in not actual news, there was, before Christmas, and this is how far it's got. Now, my friends all know I play Pokemon. And I have a lot of Pokemon friends, but I also have an awful lot of non-Pokemon friends. They mock me for the Pokemon, as you would if you had a friend that played Pokemon and you didn't yourself. And I was back in Cornwall over Christmas, and on more than one occasion, one of my friends came up to me and said, "Hey, have you seen they're re-releasing the base set cards from back in 99? Now, here's the thing. 96, sorry, it's 20th anniversary this year. Here's the thing. Firstly, yes, if that was news, I would know. But I don't blame my friends because they're clearly trying to, engage about Pokemon, and I appreciate that. They're making an effort. That makes them good people. It's almost like that's why they're my friends. But this never happened. Now, I've told you about this set that's releasing in Japan that has got the nostalgic look, and I told you about the sleeves, which are making them look like the old cards, but I did tell you we didn't know what was in them. It could be reprint of old cards. It might not. Now, it was widely reported in news circles that the original base set is being reprinted. It's not. It got so big, it actually made the sidebar on Facebook, that little bit to the right of your news feed, where it's showing all the biggest stories and then makes you depressed for the world when you see what the, quote, biggest stories are. Well, even that was showing that this is happening, and it's not, quite frankly. But we do know what's in it now. Yay! It's going to be a random deck of 60 cards, 32 damage counters, 2 markers, poison burn, etc., 1 coin and an instruction book. The cards are random and may contain duplicate cards. Or sorry, it says will contain. Now, what it's actually said is it's going to be largely reprints of X and Y and X and Y break sets, i.e. from X and Y up to, well, breakthrough or break point, or as we would understand them. Obviously got different names in Japan. And it does imply that a few cards outside of the last 2 eras will be reprinted. It says, with a few exceptions, the cards comprising this product are reprints from the Pokemon card game XY and XY Break, and they have the same backs as the Pokemon card X and Y Break series, so they can be played together. The only reason to include that comment that the backs will be the same is if they were reprinting cards that were released before the backs of Japanese cards changed. Now, this is another story I've told on the podcast previously. Although we've always had the same backs of cards, that's not the case in Japan. After Neo Destiny, the backs of Japanese cards changed, hence why they're releasing sleeves to look like the old backs of cards. So the implication here, and again, it's not been confirmed, but the implication is that there are going to be some cards released which are reprints from the base set through to Neo Destiny, because otherwise, why would they need to mention that the card backs are going to be the same? Anything printed after Neo Destiny, the card backs would always be the same. Interesting, ladies and gentlemen. However, the story really, for me, it's interesting from the point of view of how idiots started reporting it wrong and making assumptions. In terms of an actual news story, they're reprinting a bunch of cards. That's it. That's the news story. It's not terribly exciting. It could, I suppose, end us in a situation where some cards are reprinted. You know, let's say X and Y cards are reprinted now, and they get a new set symbol or whatever, and then they remain legal after the next rotation. I don't know, maybe something like a Raichu or an Aromatisse will remain legal after the next rotation because of this. Outside of that, it's a cool little collector's item, and really nothing more than that. But we shall see. We shall see. And there is a new card to tell you about. Umbreon EX from Awakening of the Psychic Kings. That is the next Japanese set, what I believe will be our May set, if I remember correctly. And it's been revealed pretty gosh darn early. It looks like it's come from, there we go, a promotional image advertising the Pokemon TCG lottery campaign that started at Pokemon Centers. Now, it's got 2 attacks, one that I find kind of interesting and one that I find kind of interesting. For a colourless energy, 20 damage, discard any number of cards from your hand, draw an equal number of cards from your deck. I like this as a 1 energy attack, which it is, as a setup in certain decks. Now, I don't know if it will work, but I like the idea of this in Vespiquen. Stay with me to see if we can follow the logic here. Now, the downside, of course, Vespiquen is a deck which tries to one-hit KO anything while giving up 1 prize per turn. Leading off with an EX is not what we're after. Right, got that out of the way. Here's my theory. You have a hand of 6 Pokemon. You dump those 6 Pokemon. You draw more cards. You can play more Pokemon than usual, because not only does Umbreon allow you to discard those Pokemon, it also allows you to draw cards while doing so. So you could play it with some kind of, roller skate engine, for instance, or you could play it with Scorched Earth or something along those lines if you could find room for fire energy. Theory being, you can basically try and make your hand as large as possible. Maybe try and end the turn with 8, 9, 10 cards in your hand. Maybe 6 or 7 of them are Pokemon. You discard them all. You start really getting a lot of Pokemon in discard early while setting up. You then try and get the Umbreon off the field, Super Scoop Up, something like that. And out comes your Vespiquen to wreck face. Now, there are other decks that like to discard cards early, but usually something like a Battle Compressor will do. That's the trainer card that allows you to discard free cards from your deck. The only reason I can see for this attack from Umbreon is when you really need to discard a whole bunch of cards very quickly. And the only deck I can think of off the top of my head right now that would want to do that is Vespiquen. Whether it will work, whether you can make it consistent, I don't know. But if you can start, you can play 4 Umbreon, try and start with 1, and then just dump the rest. What I really like the idea of here is starting with Umbreon, and even if you've got a hand, because generally you're going to be playing Pokemon and consistency cards, and a few energy. So if you start with a card full of Pokemon, oh no, I've got nothing to draw. Oh wait, 1 energy on Umbreon, now we're sorted. Dump a whole bunch of cards, draw some next turn, and by the time Vespiquen comes out, you are rolling. The Umbreon could make you slightly more vulnerable against non-EX decks to swing the prize trade, but against non-EX decks, you don't need that many Pokemon in the discard pile, so maybe you don't start off with Umbreon. Now, I'm a player that has been investigating Vespiquen a lot lately. I've made no secret of my Evil Town Vespiquen Bats deck. Mine and Joe Bernard's, I should say. Check out Omnipoke, by the way. After you've watched all the PTCG radio videos, check out Omnipoke, my favourite non-PTCG radio YouTube channel. And that's saying a lot, because there are some really good ones around. Anyway, what was I saying? Umbreon. Actually, speaking of which, the video I've just uploaded is a final from Huddersfield Regional. It's Vespiquen against Skeptile. Have a look at that game. In terms of consistency, in terms of, I don't want to give any spoilers, in terms of needing to dump Pokemon in the discard pile, Umbreon could have really, really helped. Second attack, Dark and a double colourless, 70 damage. If it knocks out a Mega Pokemon, or Mega Evolved Pokemon, you take 4 prizes rather than 2. It completely shuts down Mega decks. And with something like Vespiquen, you could really manipulate the amount of damage. This could be a one-off tech in any dark deck. Let's get away from Vespiquen now. In any dark deck, this could be a one-off tech, and on the off chance you end up facing against a Mega Evolution deck, out comes Umbreon, especially in Expanded. Dark Patch, double colourless, you're off. Now, okay, let's say that your opponent knows that you're playing Umbreon and just doesn't play their Mega. Brilliant! That's a wonderful position. If your opponent has made and I talk about this, with decks like, decks like Empoleon, for instance, that do more damage depending on your opponent's bench, or Zoroark, I suppose, is more relevant at the moment. Let's say, for argument's sake, your opponent goes, well, I'm not going to put down my Mega because you've got an Umbreon. That's wonderful. Your opponent's saying, well, I made my deck to use Mega Pokemon, but I'm going to screw you over by not using Mega Pokemon, which is what I want to do in my deck. If my opponent's best plan against me is to not play their deck like they designed it, sounds pretty good to me. So let's have a chat about City Championships. And there's one deck which is making a comeback from this, and then a new deck I want to talk about at the end before we get rolling here. Now, we've had a lot of City Championships now, and I should give a huge shout out to the Charizard Lounge. I don't use the articles on the website as often as I should, so I cannot comment too much on them. What I love about the CharizardLounge.com, and listen to old podcasts, I've done it myself in the past, they are really good and really patient with collecting information. The standard City Championship results here, they have collated from 186 City Championships. That is utterly, utterly crazy. And 81 expanded City Championships. That's just ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. So, yeah. It's looking pretty gosh darn good. So let's start having a look. We'll start with standard and just chuck in expanded on the end. So, let's have a quick go week by week. In week 1, we saw that Mega Manectric, Night March, Eviltal Zoroark, Lucario Crobat, Vespiquen, and Raichu Crobat were all viable decks, all winning city championships. Going into week 2, Eviltal Zoroark still doing pretty well. Night March is starting to come up. Mega Manectric, Manectric Crobat are starting to do well. Dragon's Bronzong wins 4 of them, but the rest are starting to fall back just a little bit. Going into week 3, Eviltal Zoroark still doing very well. Night March continuing to do well, but nowhere near as well. Mega Manectric continuing to do well. Manectric Crobat continuing to do well. Dragon's Bronzong starting to fall off a little bit. Moving into week 4, Night March suddenly jumps up to the top with 7 wins, almost twice as many as Eviltal Zoroark, which had 4. But week 4 is the first week I haven't talked about on the podcast, which is why we're taking a bit more time here. 26 top cuts for Night March, 12 for Eviltal Zoroark. Oh, and by the way, Entei Charizard comes in as the 3rd best deck with 2 wins and 11 overall top cuts. That's pretty impressive. Entei Charizard was pretty much a non-factor in week 3. I'm just having a look down the list here, trying to see if it actually cut any decks whatsoever. I don't think it saw a single top cut in week 3. Going into week 4, and all of a sudden, Entei Charizard has 2 wins and 9 other top cuts. And Night March has gone from a nice deck that people are playing to, at least in week 4, the best deck. Now, we need to bear in mind, ladies and gentlemen, what I've told you about cities in the past. Cities are a whole number of tournaments where we have many tournaments every week for a number of weeks. That gives a metagame time to evolve. So things like Dragon's Bronzong doing pretty well, and then by the time we get to week 4, 1 win, 1 second, 1 top 4. Raichu Crobat doing quite well, and then by week 4, 1 win, 2 top 4s. People are basically either countering or giving up on those decks, while decks like Entei and Night March are rising up. Now, how did Entei Charizard start doing so well? It's really good against Eviltal. And it's pretty good against Zoroark as well. So the Eviltal Zoroark deck pretty much falls to it. Now, it doesn't have a great time against Night March. No, sorry, it has an excellent time against Night March. What am I saying? As soon as you get 2 Assault Vests, they're doing minus 80 damage. If you attack with the first attack on the Entei, remember I explained it last week, go back to last week if you want to hear more about this deck, then you're getting a KO on a Joltik whilst blocking 110 damage the following turn. It's countering the 2 best decks. And Manectric Crobat and Mega Manectric are just about hanging around, but they've got 13 top cuts between them. It ain't looking great. Sorry, 16 between them. Even so, that's 10 less than Night March. As we head up into week 5, Eviltal Zoroark is making a comeback with 8 wins and 26 top cuts. Night March has 2 wins and 15 top cuts. But interestingly enough, it has 12 top 4s. It is losing in top 4. Why is it losing in top 4? Because Eviltal counters it by playing lots of baby Eviltal. Entei counters it, and they're the decks you're finding in top 4. Manectric EX, Crobat, and Mega Manectric are still hanging around as decks 4 and 5, as they have been for a couple of weeks. Vespiquen, Lucario, Raichu Crobat, Dragon's Bronzong, they are there, but they're not doing all so well. Now, I've said this before, huge props to Charizard Lounge for doing this list. I disagree with some of the seedings, but then I can rearrange them myself. They've done all the groundwork for me. If we take other Eviltal into account, we then have an extra win, 2 extra seconds, and an extra top 4. So that gives 30 top cuts, which is twice as many as Night March, and 9 wins, which is 5 as many as any other deck. Clearly the number 1 deck. I would put Entei Charizard second, 13 top cuts including 4 wins, as opposed to Night March, which had 15 top cuts, but only 2 wins. But we are starting, by week 5, we're starting to see a bit of a shakeout here. The top 3 decks are Eviltal, Night March, and Entei Charizard. They are the 3 best decks, and it's not particularly close. Manectric, Crobat, and Mega Manectric rounding out the top 5, but that really is it. Going into week 6, something weird starts happening. Yveltal completely drops off the map. 0 wins, 2 seconds, 2 top 4s for a total of 4 top cuts. Now, there's 27 cities in week 6. And it drops off the mat entirely. Why does that happen? Well, I've already told you Entei Charizard has a good matchup against it. It can hit the 170 quite easily, and they can pile on things like Assault Vest, which means you can't use DCE against it, and the Charizard, and they take quite a long time to kill. It's also pretty good in the prize race. Also, think about the Gallade. You want to be using a double colourless, but Assault Vest kind of puts paid to that. Reduces damage by 40 from any Pokemon with a special energy attached. But also, we see Night March as the winner, and it depends how Yveltal Zoroark is constructed. My Yveltal Vespiquen Bats, it beats Night March. If you set up, you beat Night March. But it's designed to beat Night March. You've got 4 baby Yveltal to take out the Joltik and the Bumpkaboo, taking a KO every turn, and you're playing Bats to jump ahead in the prize race. Well, Yveltal Zoroark, most of the lists I've seen are playing free baby Yveltal, and they're using EXs, and they're using Zoroark. Well, Zoroark's garbage against Night March, because you have no Night Marches in your discard pile to try and copy. So you've got to try and use the first attack, but then if your opponent limits... Actually, no, they'll kill it anyway. Point is, it's a stage 1 rather than a basic. That's what I should have said. Zoroark is a stage 1 rather than a basic. You're probably playing Yveltal EX, which your opponent can kill for big prizes. Yveltal does not auto-win Night March. It near as auto-wins if you build it specifically to beat Night March. But if you've got a deck with EXs in, where you're only playing 2 or 3 baby Yveltal, and you're not playing Bats to jump ahead in the prize race, well... then you need to start taking KOs. When you run out of baby Yveltals, you need to start taking KOs with your stage 1 Zoroarks or your EXs, and then you're in trouble. So, Night March, decent Yveltal matchup, unless they build it to beat Night March. Entei, a decent Yveltal matchup. And the number 3 deck, in Standard, in Week 6, Raichu Crobat, which, incidentally, has a very good Night March matchup. Now, you've still got the stage 1s against basics. That's a problem. But you also get the Bats, which allow you to jump ahead in the prize race. So that does help to even it out just a little bit. If you can get a couple of Bat KOs, I mean, not only do you generally get to take a KO when you evolve into Crobat, you can then snipe maybe for more KOs as well. Now, Raichu Crobat, and we'll talk about this more in a moment, it's always been a deck which is incredibly good in theory. In practice, it's a little bit clunky. Here's the thing, though. You don't need much of a setup to beat Yveltal with Raichu Crobat. Stage 1, DCE, couple bench Pokemon. So even when you're not setting up that well, the clunkiness which has stopped it being a top-tier deck, and believe me, just think about it. Raichu Crobat is amazing in theory. Sky Arrow Bridge, you fill your bench with 8 bench Pokemon, you're doing 160. Add a Muscle Band, that's 180. You've got Bats there as well to do extra damage if you ever need to KO the Megas. And then you start thinking it through and it makes so much sense. It's just a bit clunky in practice. But when you're playing against Night March and you just need to evolve a few Bats, and you're playing against Yveltal and you need a couple stage 1s and a few random stuff on your bench, all of a sudden, it starts looking like a pretty good deck. And I really believe that's the difference here. That's why Raichu Bats has gone from an also ran in the first few weeks, to the 3rd best deck in week 6. I've told you how good Yveltal was being. It was being amazing. Well, Raichu counters it quite nicely. And those games where it's being a little bit clunky and not setting up, you're having less of those games because you've got more games where you don't need much of a setup in order to win. So yeah, week 6. And I believe that is the most recent week. So, we are seeing a changing of the guard. And here's the weird thing, because you've really got to kind of think about this with these results. What do you prize more? Do you prize doing well over a 6-week period, or doing well at the end of a 6-week period. Now, Dragon's Bronzong, remember there was a week where it won 4 city championships. I don't think it made any cuts in week 6, which is not good. It's almost completely fallen off the map. Raichu Crobat started terribly and has done really well in week 6. So what happens next week? Do we have a situation where everyone's playing Raichu Crobat? Or do we have a situation where people go away from Yveltal for a bit and counter Raichu Crobat? Or do we remain in the status quo where Raichu Crobat remains good? The answer is, I have no idea. We shall see. But I want to look at the overall results now. That I think is quite important. So the overall standard results. Now, I'm going to look without a recency bias. Now, the results on Charizard Lounge take into account recency. I don't, purely because, yes, the format has changed now, so Yveltal Zoroark is less good and Raichu Crobat is better. That's 1 week. Yveltal Zoroark did it for 5 weeks, and even in week 6 it was all right. So just so we're clear, I don't think a drop in popularity over 1 week drops it off the top. In the top, it really is almost a coin flip between Yveltal Zoroark and Night March. Night March has 106 top cuts. Yveltal Zoroark has 104. Yveltal Zoroark has 2 more wins and 1 more second place. Night March has 5 more top 4s. I would just give the edge to Yveltal Zoroark because it tends to do better in cut, but it's really, really close. It's got 2 more wins and an extra second, and actually it's got 2 less top cuts, so that makes that slightly more impressive. Third place, it really is a toss-up between Entei Charizard and Manectric Crobat. And this one depends entirely on how much you take account of recency. Now, on the Charizard Lounge, they've got Entei Charizard significantly above Manectric Crobat, and they use a meta share calculation, which is very intelligent, and I'm not calling it, bad or anything like that. But Manectric Crobat has 4 extra top cuts, 2 extra seconds, and 2 extra top 4s. So Manectric Crobat is in 3rd place, Entei Charizard is in 4th. But you must take into account we are seeing a changing of the guard. Entei Charizard is really rushing up. Manectric Crobat, Night March matchup is quite good if you can get the bats out. Yveltal Zoroark matchup is probably about 50-50. Entei Charizard's got a good matchup against both those top 2 decks, which explains why Entei Charizard is rushing up the standings, if you will. After that, we've got Mega Manectric with 16 wins, 18 seconds, and 33 top 4s to give 67 top cuts overall as the clear number 5. And when you get into number 6, well, again, I disagree with the rankings here, but the next 3, we've got Lucario Crobat with 38 top cuts, including 9 wins, Raichu Crobat with 32 top cuts, including 10 wins, and Mega Mewtwo Y with 30 top cuts, including 5 wins. After those 8 decks, it turns into a little bit silly. Except for Dragon's Bronzong. 8 wins, 30 total top cuts, nothing in week 6. Now, I don't think you can discount how good it is, but the reality is, with the rise of cards like Hex Maniac and Night March doing so well, etc., the fact that it relies on special energy, and remember that Entei deck using Assault Vest is not nice to things that use special energy, it's kind of fallen off the map. So to summarise, Night March and Yveltal, clearly the 2 best decks. Entei, Manectric, and Mega Manectric, rounding out the top 5. And then you've got Raichu Crobat, Lucario Crobat, Mega Mewtwo Y, Vespiquen, and Dragon's Bronzong, rounding out the top 10. But you need to think about recency. Entei Charizard is growing in popularity. Raichu Crobat is growing in popularity. whereas the Manectric decks are falling. Interestingly enough, we've got a 5th place Mega Manectric that had the 3rd highest number of wins, the 3rd highest number of top cuts. But it is massively falling out of favour. I leave that one up to you, ladies and gentlemen. Now, if we look at the total number of championship points awarded, Night March 40-20, Eviltal Zoroark 40-10, Mega Manectric 25-10, Manectric Crobat 18-10, Entei Charizard 16-70, Lucario Crobat 14-40, Raichu Crobat 12-30, Dragon's Bronzong 11-40, Mega Mewtwo 10-70, and Vespiquen an even 1,000. Again, it's exactly what we would expect, although not adjusted for recency bias. In Expanded, all I want to do is have a quick look at the overall standings, because honestly, there are 5 decks standing above the rest, and it's not particularly exciting. Eviltal at No, this is wrong, sorry. Again, recency bias has to come in here. Number 1, Vespiquen with 57 top cuts, including 18 wins. Number 2, Eviltal EX with 53 top cuts, including 16 wins. Number 3, Blastoise with 32 top cuts, including 10 wins. Number 4, Seismitoad Giratina with 29 top cuts, including 9 wins. And at number 5, Seismitoad Crobat with 24 top cuts, including 16 wins. If you want to look at recency, Vespiquen is dropping in popularity, Eviltal is gaining, Blastoise is losing, Seismitoad Crobat is gaining. Night March, not doing as well as we might expect. It's languishing down in 7th place with 17 top cuts, including 2 wins. If it's won 2 out of 81 expanded tournaments, it's just not as good. It no longer has the good matchups it used to. Vespiquen trades prizes with it quite nicely. And Seismitoad, if it gets going early, can pretty much lock the deck down. Giratina stops it attacking with DCE. Blastoise can play stuff like Articuno to take an extra prize and go ahead. And Eviltal can, play stuff like Gallade or Baby Eviltal to keep up with the prize trade, although it's still a fairly rough matchup overall. Point is, it's not a bad deck. It's just not the powerhouse it was. And Night March is definitely good in Expanded. So to finish off having a look at this, let's just ask a simple question. If I'm going to a tournament tomorrow, what should I play? Now, if you're like me and you're not going to cities, the answer is let's test some weird stuff. If you want to win and you're going to a standard format tournament, you've basically got 3 choices for a tournament tomorrow. Night March, Eviltal Zoroark, probably with Gallade. Speaking of which, Ryan Morehouse, really good UK player I've mentioned a lot. He's got an article on PokeBeach.com at the moment about Eviltal that's got a really good list in it. It's a very interesting article. Now, I've said bad things about some websites in the past. I'm not being paid or anything silly like that. I do count Ryan as a friend. He's a lovely chap. But the point is, it's a really good article, and I highly suggest you all go find it. So, that'll give you a nice Eviltal Zoroark list with Gallade and Entei Charizard. And honestly, if you're going to a standard format tournament this weekend, they are the only 3 decks I think you can consider. Yeah, the Manectrics have done well, but they're really waning in popularity. Now, if you want a wild card choice, consider Raichu Crobat. If you can make it unclunky enough, it's in theory got pretty good matchups against Night March and Eviltal, although the reliance on DCE will suck against Entei Charizard. I don't think that'll be a very good matchup. If you're going to an expanded tournament this weekend, there are 5 decks to consider: Eviltal, Vespiquen, Blastoise, and Seismitoad with Crobat or Giratina. Honestly, at the moment, I wouldn't really play anything other than Eviltal. You can put Seismitoad into it, you can put Gallade into it, you can put Archeops into it. If you play against a Vespiquen and you drop an Archeops going first on turn 1, yeah, they can evolve using Wally, Evo Soda, and Energy Evolution Eevee, but they're not playing many, if any, Evo Soda or Wally, and even Energy Evolution Eevee. Okay, go and attach your 1 basic energy to Eevee to evolve it into Flower. Oh, wait. That's your energy attachment for the turn, and you need 2 energy in order to attack. Please feel free to waste your energy attachment and your supporter for the turn, Blacksmith, just to get 1 Flareon up and going. I'm okay with that. I'm going to be quite comfortable if that's the route my opponent chooses. And outside of those 5 decks, I mean, maybe in a best of 3 you can go Sableye, Garbodor. Even that, I would worry about. So the deck that's making a bit of a comeback I wanted to talk about this week was Raichu Bats, and I didn't really intend to, but I kind of covered that a minute ago. It's very simple. There are 2 main parts to the deck. You have Raichu. He does 20 damage times all of your bench Pokemon. You have Skyro Bridge. You put a whole bunch of Pokemon on your bench. You go. You can play cards like Unknown to fill your bench or add consistency. You can play a whole bunch of Shaman to fill your bench and add consistency. And you play Bats. Now, the beauty of Raichu is, if you've got a full bench with Skyro Bridge, that's 160 damage. Muscle Band makes 180. That's already KOing EXs. You're also hitting Evil Tao for weakness, and he's quite big right now. I think hopefully you might have gotten that from what I've been saying so far today. So, that's pretty useful. You've also got Bats. Now, Bats do a couple of things. Firstly, they add a bit of damage. But that's not really the best way to play it. I mean, they help you hit the numbers on the Megas, which is pretty crucial, to be honest. But what the Bats really do is they allow you to jump ahead in the prize race. For instance, if you're looking at, playing Night March, it's going to jump you ahead in the prize race. If you're playing against a Vespiquen and you can drop a couple of Golbats to kill a Combi, you're slowing their setup and you're setting yourself up nicely in the prize race. It really is a very good way of going about this. Whether it's going to remain, like I say, the big challenge is making it consistent enough. Prize trade is on your side because other than Shaman, you're playing entirely non-EXs. And you're hitting for 1 energy per turn, which long-time listeners to the podcast will know I am a huge fan of decks that can hit for a single energy. But you're going to find some matchups like Entei Charizard, where they're just coming along and hitting you in the face, and you can't use DCE, so you're trying to snipe with Crobat or attach 2 basic energy to Raichu. And when you get to that stage, you are in trouble. But if all you do is play stuff like Night March and Evil Tao all day, you're going to be looking pretty good, to be honest, ladies and gentlemen. It's going to start looking pretty gosh darn good. So, the last deck I wanted to talk about, what we're going to end on today, is Vespiquen Vileplume. Now, I had an idea for this. And my idea was fairly simple. Play a really Pokemon-heavy Vespiquen list. Play it with Vileplume and Forest of Giant Plants. Here's the theory. You play it with Forest of Giant Plants. One of the big problems with Vespiquen, or 2 of the big problems, first, you have no attacker on turn 1 because you can't evolve, and you need to evolve to attack with Vespiquen. Secondly, your Combis have 40 HP, and a double Golbat drop will kill them on the bench. And if you've played Vespiquen against Bat decks, you'll know that pain. Well, Forest of Giant Plants helps with both of them. The other thing is, you need a second attacker, so I was going to put Evil Tao in there just to help accelerate energy, reduce reliance on DCE, and I need more Pokemon in the deck anyway. Where does Vileplume come in? Well, if I'm playing Forest of Giant Plants and I need a deck all full of Pokemon, why not play Vileplume? The theory is this. You get going on turn 1, you set up your Vespiquen, you dump a whole bunch of Pokemon in the discard pile, you then get Vileplume going. Let's say you can get 6-7 Pokemon in the discard turn 1. If you're hitting 90 damage turn 1 and your opponent is trainer locked, you're going to win most games. It sounds so good in theory. Your opponent's trainer locked, you're hitting for a DCE. Yeah, Vespiquen takes a little while to get going sometimes. Yeah, Vespiquen's only got 90 HP. But when you stop your opponent setting up, neither of those things is particularly terrible. Life remains good, you win games. Oh my goodness, it doesn't work in theory. You have to put battle compressors in to discard the Pokemon, but early game, you need all of your Oddish, Gloom, and Vileplume, so you can't discard them. You need your 4/4 line of Vespiquen, you can't discard them. You need your Unknowns and your Shaymins, because you need to draw cards to try and get your Vileplume out. So when you play that battle compressor turn 1, there's nothing to discard. You need your draw power to draw, your Vespiquen to attack, and your Vileplume to block trainers. Now, the cool thing about the deck is, by the time you set up, you only need one Vileplume. As soon as you've set up a Vileplume, you can just dump every other Gloom, Vileplume, and Oddish in your deck. Because one of two things is going to happen. Number one, your opponent never KOs the Vileplume, you don't need a second. Number two, your opponent KOs the Vileplume, gives you an extra turn of attacking with Vespiquen, because they're not killing the Vespiquen. Gives you an extra turn with DCE, because they're not getting rid of the DCE, because they're not KOing the Vespiquen. And puts 3 more Pokemon in your discard pile. By which point, you should be able to sweep. Put it this way, if your opponent KOs the Vileplume, and you're not at a stage where you can just sweep with a bunch of Vespiquen, you've lost the game anyway. All the Vileplume would do in that scenario is slow your opponent down for a couple of turns, long enough for you to get the Vespiquen rolling, because by the time you're one-hit KOing anything with Vespiquen, who cares what your opponent does? It's pretty much irrelevant. Another plug for my YouTube video, youtube.com/PTCGRadio, interesting Vespiquen deck. Just putting it out there. It actually just finished uploading as I'm recording this, right now. So, bearing all this in mind, why doesn't it work? Well, like I said, the battle compressors are dead early, but you just need too much. You end up whiffing the Vespiquen, all the energy, all the Vileplume, or you get it all, but there's no Pokemon in the discard pile. I just couldn't get it working. Now, weirdly, as I'm playing around with this, and I promise you it's a coincidence, if you want to call me a liar, then that's kind of mean, but fine. See if I care. Charizard Lounge. I'm not going to spend the whole of today plugging other things. That's not what I'm going to be doing this year. It's just I'm referring to them, and it's only fair to give them their due. And they had an article about it. Now, I don't like the list, but I just found it quite interesting. They're playing a similar kind of thing with Oddish, Gloom, and Vileplume, Combi and Vespiquen, Unknown and Shaymin. 2 things I don't like about the list. Well, a few things, actually. They're only playing 3 Sycamore, although they are playing 6 balls, 4 Acrobike, 4 Trainers Mail, so maybe that will help. But still, I don't like the consistency cards there. They're only playing 4 double colourless energy, so Zerosic screws you over, Edgeslash screws you over. There's no Lysandra in the list, which means your opponent can essentially hide on the bench, force you to take unfavourable prizes, etc., etc. And I did a few games with it. It's a little bit clunky. It's only playing 4 double colourless. There's no Lysandra. I'm not a huge fan. However, if you want to check it out on charizardlounge.com, he did get second at his city championship. Although, as I've said before, 1 tournament, 1 player does not make a deck good. Could have been good matchups, good luck, or it could be a good deck. I'm not saying it's a bad deck. I'm saying I desperately want Vespiquen Vileplume to work. I can't get it working. I encourage you guys to have a go with the deck, but I think it's one of those things. You need to be able to set up the stage 1 and the stage 2. Now, you've got Forest of Giant Plants, but you still need to get them all and in the right order. You need to have the Oddish before you get the Gloom, and you need to have the Gloom before you get the Vileplume. And trying to play loads of Pokemon and make a consistent deck that sets it all up is just very, very difficult. But hey-ho. And that, ladies and gentlemen, will do it for this week. We've gone through City Championship results for the first 6 weeks. We've gone through the news, including the interesting new Umbreon EX. I've plugged my YouTube channel, youtube.com/PTCGRadio, once or twice, and we've talked about the possible return of Crobat Raichu and the almost certain not rise of Vespiquen Vileplume. And I think that's it. This is week 1 of 2016, ladies and gentlemen. And in fact, I'm going to start giving a date on podcast. This is January the 6th, 2016. And I think we're on week 177, if I remember correctly. Which means this year we're going to hit 200 podcasts. How cool is that? We've got many, many more weeks to come, ladies and gentlemen. As always, you can tweet me at the Wassy. You can email me at PTCGRadio podcast@hotmail.co.uk. If you're listening on YouTube, you can chuck a comment down below. You can also do that on WordPress. Subscribe on iTunes and leave me a comment and a review, please. That would be very nice of you. Thank you very much for listening. Look after yourselves till next week. I hope the first week of 2016 has been very kind to you, and I hope next week will be as well. Thank you very much for listening. My name is Ross, and you've been listening to PTCG Radio.